And thank you, Dr. Kevin Lam, for your kind introduction earlier. And I also want to join Father Anthony Usler in thanking colleagues at the Asian Civilisations Museum of Singapore for providing us with the opportunity to share our resources and scholarly experience with you all. Matteo Ricci and other early Jesuit missionaries to China are truly a generation of giants. Their legacies are always celebrated in cross-cultural encounters between the East and the West. Meanwhile, we should remember that between 1582, when Matteo Ricci arrived in China, to 1773, when the Society of Jesus was suppressed, there were 472 Jesuits who served in China. My presentation will bring us to another phase of the Jesuit mission to China from the 1840s to the 1950s, centering on a new location, Xujiahui in Shanghai. We will have the opportunity to learn about another aspect of the Jesuit mission to China in modern Chinese history, a social enterprise that provided Chinese orphans with life skills and nurtured the growth of many young Chinese artists. Let me start from Shanghai, China last year. An interesting event took place in March 2023. It was an art exhibit in the newly renovated building of the former headquarters of the Chartered Bank of India, Australia, and China, established in 1923 on the Bund, Shanghai. And now today it is a restaurant. Then, entitled Retrospective Shanghai Centennial Chronicle Figure Painting Exhibit. And this exhibition featured more than 20 watercolor paintings by a dozen of Chinese artists today that captured the 180 years of the history since the opening of Shanghai as a seaport in 1843. These works are based on historical encounters, historical accounts that took place in various landmark areas of Shanghai. They include not only the cityscape, but also a large number of historical figures, enterprise establishments, and important historical events. Here are a few of them. The opening of Shanghai captures the opening of the city for foreign trade. Jiangnan Manufacturing Bureau depicts not only the work environment of this important industrial enterprise, but also prominent figures as Zheng Guofan and Li Hongzhang. The commercial press features publications by this internationally known publisher and the role some of its workers played during the regime change in 1949. Standing prominently with other paintings is one that features an area called Tushanwan. And interestingly enough, throughout the whole exhibit, there is no specific painting about Xujiahui, where Tushanwan is a part. A close look at the painting shows that some young men learning to paint, while others learning to carve. Also noticeable are few Jesuits and prominent Chinese associated with Tushanwan Orphanage, such as Ma Xiangbo. Let us come back to Singapore at present. Today, we're delighted to see some of the best artworks from Tushanwan, pagodas, publications, figurines, and paintings against a background of a historical event. The Panama Pacific International Exposition that took place in San Francisco in 1915 while discussing a series of international expositions at which artworks by Tushanwan orphans were prominently featured during the first 25 years of the 20th century, namely the 1900 Universal Exposition in Paris, the 1902 Hanoi Exposition, the 1915 Panama Pacific International Exposition in San Francisco, and the 1925 Vatican Universal Missionary Exposition. Dr. William Ma, an art historian specialized in Tushanwan artworks, suggests.
The Tushanwan workshops were no strangers to international expositions, religious or secular. The goals of these expositions, made explicit in their publications, were to celebrate and promote missionary charity works in China while advertising their handmade products with the hope of attracting new commissions and patrons. Tushanwan's participation in PPIE stood out from the rest in terms of the scale and ambition of the displays and the attention they attracted.
But how did things happen in Tushanwan and Xujiahui, of which Tushanwan was an integral part during probably the most tumultuous period in modern Chinese history? And who are the people behind those beautiful artworks that some of you have seen or are going to see in the museum? With names, but on so many accounts without names. Of course, it would be impossible to summarize everything that took place at Tushanwan in more than 100 years within 40 minutes. Moreover, Tushanwan Orphanage is just one of many social enterprises established by the Catholic missionaries during the late Qing and early Republican period. I hope that I will be able to provide some background information with a few entry points for reflections and further explorations of the current exhibit. Most of the images that you're going to see in my presentation are from the collections of the Ricci Institute at Boston College, the China Mission Photograph Collection of the USA West Province of the Society of Jesus, open sources online, and colleagues of the Ricci Institute. The First Opium War is a well-known historical event in modern Chinese history, a series of military conflicts between Great Britain and Qing Empire between 1839 and 1842 on the coast of Guangdong province led to the humiliating defeat of the Qing army, resulting in a treaty between the Qing Empire and Great Britain in 1842, notoriously known as the Treaty of Nanjing, signed in 1842. This unequal settlement stipulates that Canton, Amoy, also known as Xiamen, Fuzhoufu, Ningbo, and Shanghai would be open ports for trade. And Shanghai progressed rapidly to meet the needs of the foreign trade and presence of the foreigners afterwards. This is a 1884 reprint of a map of Shanghai in 1872, entitled Complete Map of Shanghai County Walled City and Foreign Settlements. The city was already well developed, and the foreign concessions were clearly marked. A photograph of the Shanghai Bund in the 1890s also suggests it was indeed a growing port for trade. Something important also took place at this time. 3 French Jesuits, led by Father Claude Gotland from the Paris province of the Society of Jesus, left France on April 28, 1841, and arrived in Macau on October 21st of the same year. Discussions were made for them to go to Shanghai, the hometown of Xu Guangqi, and Father Anthony Usler discussed earlier, and they arrived in Shanghai on July the 11th, 1842, more than a year since they left their home country, France. A few years later, Xujiahui was selected by the French Jesuits as the society's future center of the Jesuit mission in Jiangnan. A recent Ricci Institute research fellow, Dr. Mo Wei from Shanghai, suggests that such a decision was made, one, most likely because of the close historical tie between the local community with the Catholic Church, two, close vicinity to the French concession and the city center, and three, the relatively cheaper price for land offered opportunities for future expansion. However, behind the facade of the rapid growth in Shanghai, life was not easy. Years of natural disasters and wars brought humanitarian disasters to the city as well, especially for the children. In his monumental publication, Histoire de la Mission de Jiangnan, August Colombel, a distinguished Jesuit historian, quoted one of the letters dated September the 21st, 1849, by the superior of the Jesuit Jiangnan mission, his observations of the situation.
The unfortunate Chinese Empire is and will be all this year in dire distress. Our province in particular, flooded for several months and deprived of a large part of the year's mission, will be prey to a horrible famine until the next harvest. Oh, how long the coming winter will be in Jiangnan! Not to mention the unfortunate people who die from the horrors of hunger due to the lack of food and all resources to obtain it, something which is often seen in certain parts of this province. For a large number of parents, that need makes inhumane the little children are no more than useless mouths from which the family must be relieved. Little girls in particular are mercilessly sacrificed. They can be found floating on flowers in little straw bolettes that wrap them up, or exposed in the ruins around towns, or left overnight by less barbaric parents at the doors of our churches and the homes of our Christians, where they know that religion welcomes them with charity and nurtures them with tenderness.
During the second half of the 19th century, the Jiangnan region suffered a number of natural disasters, both flood and drought, leading to severe shortage of food. Then the wars as a result of Taiping Rebellion led to the death of millions of people and displaced probably even more. Poverty, malnutrition, diseases were also among the contributing factors. In the midst of the political turmoil, natural disasters, and human tragedies, it is the children who often suffer the most. Many children were deserted because their parents had no means to feed or take care of them, or because their parents did not survive in the first place. As a result, orphanage establishments became a major social enterprise for Catholic missions in Shanghai, particularly the Jesuits. For the Jesuit superior of the Jiangnan mission, the goal is very clear.
By taking on the task of raising abandoned children, and by inspiring our Christians to help us in this endeavor, we are working to provide an opportunity for the mass of people among whom we live.
Meanwhile, the city of Shanghai never stopped growing. The city had a population of 500,000 in the 1850s. By the 1900s, it had more than 1 million residents. By the 1930s, it was a city with a population of 2.7 million. Within 80 years, it became the 6th largest city in the world. Of course, a direct result of the Treaty of Nanjing led to the establishment of French concessions and other international settlements in the city in the 19th century. In this map of Shanghai, printed in Tushanwan, the French concession, which was established in 1849, is clearly marked. Also marked on the map, just next to the French concession, is Xujiahui. While reflecting on the history of the Catholic community developed in Xujiahui from the 1840s to the 1940s, Reverend Edward Malatesta, founding director of the Ricci Institute, suggests,
for just over 100 years, an area which grew to 1.5 square miles was the scene of a Catholic presence and activity unique in Asia for intensity, variety, and influence. This parcel of land, originally outside of the city of Shanghai, was gradually surrounded by the expanding metropolis to exist as a Christian leaven in the midst of China's major city.
On these 1.5 square miles of Christian leaven rose some of the most prominent establishments: a major seminary, an observatory, a middle school, a Jesuit residence, and most prominently, the magnificent St. Ignatius Cathedral, just to name a few. Even if we look at an earlier map of Xujiahui made in 1875, some of the structures were already in existence by then. Among them is what was called Shengmu Yuan, where presentation sisters and sisters from the Helpers of the Holy Soul regularly took in orphans. Again, in Colin Bell's book, a table provides detailed information about charity activities at the place, including number of students, seniors living in the hospice, people baptized, patients treated. If you notice, that number is close to 200,000. And of course, the number of orphans below school age they took in between 1878 and 1900, a staggering 4,793. As we entered the 20th century, Shengmu Yuan continued to grow and became an even larger operation. Here, Catholic sisters offered daily cares. Sign language was being taught at the school. Embroidery workshop and art studio, among others, were established. At Shengmu Yuan, orphaned girls found a home. Down the creek from Shengmu Yuan, the situation facing the Jesuits was no better. Again, Father Colin Bell's book provides us with insights. Before, during, and after Tushanwan Orphanage was established, the missionaries received close to 4,000 orphans from 1848 to 1900. This is in addition to the orphans in other nearby parishes. To help mitigate the disaster devastating Shanghai and beyond, the Catholic Diocese of Shanghai bought Tushanwan in the mid-19th century, bulldozed a small hill within the Xujiahui area, and developed throughout the years a large orphanage so that it would be able to accommodate displaced orphans, including those the neighboring parishes couldn't hold. Named Tushanwan Orphanage, the facility was established with a mission for Christian charity. In addition to shelter, clothing, food, Jesuit missionaries also hoped to provide the orphans with the skills necessary to support themselves and flourish in society. However, they never expected that, based on their training in Tushanwan, some of the orphans would become nationally and internationally known artists. We should also not forget that there were other Catholic missionaries who worked in Shanghai, particularly at Xujiahui area from the mid-19th to the mid-20th centuries, including French and Chinese Jesuits, French sisters, Chinese sisters, California Jesuits. During the Second World War, Canadian French Jesuits were also present in Shanghai in war relief works. Tushanwan is what Colin Bell described as a place with a double function, or an organization that consists of two segments, an orphanage and many workshops. A map of the entire orphanage provides us with more details. Within this compound, from the mid-1860s to the mid-1950s, many Jesuits worked in the orphanage in administration, teaching classes of various subjects, and tutoring students in painting, sculpturing, stained glass making, photography, carpentry, typesetting, mechanics, iron foundry, and much more. Let's just take a look at a few of them. And this is the press and its printing shop, the stained glass workshop, classrooms, woodwork department, painting studio. A significant number of biographical works have been done by both Western and Chinese scholars about the Jesuit missions at Tushanwan. In this presentation, I want to just mention one of them, Brother Xavier Coupe, whom you will also see in a few minutes in a film footage. Born in 1886 in France and primarily studied mechanics at school, he came to China in 1810. He was a person with many talents. In Tushanwan, he was first appointed as the head of the art studio while managing the hardware department and printing press. For a while, he also directed the music band. After the death of another Chinese Jesuit, Brother Henry Yuan, his job extended to the photography department. According to Mr. Zhang Wei, a specialist in Shanghai history and culture, while teaching orphans different work skills, Brother Coupe was also very, very keen on providing the orphans with knowledge, language, science, literature, etc. He was a father that many orphans never had, believing that knowledge would change their lives. Brother Coupe was not the first to arrive in Xujiahui. However, he was among the last to leave China. In 1955, with the pending expiration of his visa in China, it was time for him to say goodbye to the place he has given 45 years of his life to, and bid farewell to the orphans he had worked with for years. "Are you going back to France?" he was asked. "I have vowed to serve our China mission. I will go to Taiwan," he answered. A few words before the next section of my presentation. One of the visitors that the Jesuits in China welcomed in 1947 is Father Bernard Hubbard, a native California. His entire religious life almost had nothing to do with Asia. Known as the Glacier Priest, he was a Jesuit priest, the head of a department of geology at the University of Santa Clara, California, and was a chaplain in the U.S. Army. In the spring of the same year, he was asked to come to China and produce films there as part of a film production tour of the Jesuit missions in the world. Subsequently, and he traveled to Beijing, Shanghai, Nanjing, and Yangzhou and produced the film Ageless China, an excerpt of which we'll see very shortly. While discussing the title of the film, Ageless China, Professor Joseph Ho of Albion College in Michigan suggests,
Hubbard, who shot his footage in major cities, Beijing, Nanjing, and Shanghai, under nationalist control in 1947, now presented them as an idealized perspective of a lost China, an approach that probably influenced his decision to describe the country in the title as ageless.
With Father Hubbard's remarkable work, we're now having the opportunity to meet with our own eyes besides the current exhibit some of the orphans in Tushanwan and witness their life.
Now in one long jump from the old imperial splendors of Peking to the modern city of Shanghai, where a Texaco sign looming up in front of the camera highlights the contrast between the grandeur of Peking and the drabness of Shanghai, strange city that is a hodgepodge of European, American, and Chinese influences. In the canals in and around Shanghai, a tribe of people are born, live, and die on these canal boats. They are a race apart, these boat people, with their own dialect, a sort of gypsy race. Children playing outside the compound wall at Xujiahui. And there is the old chapel of this famous mission center, one of the largest and greatest mission centers in the whole world. It stands upon the site of the old home of Xujiahui, one of the Father Ricci's early converts, who in 1610 established in his home at Shanghai a Christian mission, today one of the largest Catholic centers in the Far East. This is where Xujiahui lived. In 1630 he became Imperial Chancellor of China, the highest office in the empire corresponding to the post of Prime Minister. This, his ancient home, is today a Jesuit mission center, with schools, orphanages, a major and minor seminary, a famous observatory, a house of theology, and a great church of cathedral proportions. 2 orphan boys, now grown up, both deaf-mutes, who have learned the sign language in the orphanage. The Jesuit brother, who for many years has directed the boys' orphanage at Xujiahui in Xujiahui. The orphanage where orphan boys become expert craftsmen, artists and artisans, painters, sculptors, wood carvers, goldsmith and silversmith workers, and where they learn trades as well, printing, shoemaking, carpentry. This is all some of their work. Here are little deaf-mute orphan girls learning the sign language. One feels the vibrations in the throat of another, learning to form sounds. That is a Chinese helper of the Holy Souls, teaching her wards the sign language. Notice how she accompanies her gestures with lively facial expressions. You can almost tell what she's saying by the expressions on her face. Again, a wonderful work in human reclamation. These craftsmen and artists were once abandoned babies, picked up in the streets of Shanghai by pious Christian women organized for this work of mercy, brought into the orphanage at Xujiahui, cared for by the helpers of the Holy Souls. Then at a certain age, the boys turned over to the boys' orphanage run by the Jesuits, the girls kept in the girls' orphanage conducted by the nuns. Here is a marvelous piece of wood carving of the Blessed Mother of China. There in the centerpiece is the Blessed Mother and her infant son, and around the sides are carvings of all the famous cathedrals in the world. At the top you can see St. Peter's in Rome. All of this intricate work, marvelous craftsmanship that compares with the best wood carving done anywhere in the world, is the work of the orphan boys you see here displaying their handiwork. When we see what these youthful Chinese orphans are capable of, we understand better the great architectural treasures of Peking. Here is another wood carving done by the orphan artists, a panel depicting a scene from one of the old Chinese historical romances. Unfortunately, the camera cannot bring out all the intricacies of this delicate wood carving. Where in Europe or in America can you duplicate this fine work? And now a panoramic view of Xujiahui, the great mission center on the outskirts of Shanghai. There in the background, you see the convent of the Helpers of the Holy Souls, whose schools and great orphanage across the canal complement the Jesuit institutions for boys and young men on this side of the canal.
We're almost certain the voice is Father Hubbard's voice. While preparing this presentation, I came across quite a number of accomplished Chinese artists who spent a significant amount of time in Tushanwan in childhood. Let me choose just two of them as examples. Born in 1926, Mr. Xu Baoqing lost his father at the age of 1, and then mother at the age of 3. Together with his sister and brother, he was sent to an orphanage. At the age of 6, he was transferred to Tushanwan Orphanage. And 2 years before that, both his sister and brother died. He started painting classes in elementary school. His sketchbook class teacher, Brother Tanaka, a Japanese Jesuit brother, quickly discovered his talent in painting. And Mr. Xu also received guidance from Brother Xavier Coupe in wood carving and sculpture, and oil painting from a Spanish Jesuit. However, Mr. Xu's real contribution to art today is best known as his creation of sculptures and wood carving works with boxwood, a unique genre in traditional Chinese folk art. Many of his early works are religious theme-based, such as The Last Supper, Agony, The Flight into Egypt, and after the 1950s, most of his works are about historical themes, such as this one, and it is the Zhang Jian's mission to the Western region. And some daily life, such as Returning Home and Leapfrog, and some of his works about children, and some people, through some oral interviews, kind of speculate because his child was so miserable and he lost his parents so early and his siblings, and there was such a strong desire for a happy life during childhood. Among the most distinguished, I should say, Chinese artists out of Tushanwan, it was Mr. Zhang Chongren, and he himself was not an orphan, but his parents were. His father was left for foster care at Tushanwan at a very young age, learning carpentry and carving. His mother worked in the embroidery department at Shengmu Yuan. And with brother Henry Yu as his tutor, Mr. Zhang started his learning at Tushanwan. First photography, charcoal sketching, and then sculpturing. His art talents were further developed as a result of his studies at the Royal Academy of Fine Arts, Brussels, in Belgium. Although Mr. Zhang was an accomplished oil painter, he was best known as a sculptor. Some of his best-known works would include Love and Responsibilities, Clear Stream, The Baptism of Jesus. For many Chinese and Westerners, he's also remembered for his sculpture of Qi Baishi, a renowned Chinese painter. A story goes, after the painter saw the sculpture of himself by Mr. Zhang, Qi Baishi presented his calligraphy to him with high compliments. Clay sculpture by a divinely talented hand. Throughout his life, he created sculptures for many nationally and internationally known figures, including Chiang Kai-shek, Jon Stewart, Deng Xiaoping, and the French President François Mitterrand. After appreciating some of the works by the best-known artists from Tushanwan, we also have to recognize the fact that many of the artworks from Tushanwan are not associated with any specific names, including most of the artworks here on display in the museum, and this is also true for some of the artworks at the Ricci Institute at Boston College. For example, we have this unique chest from Tushanwan, similar to the one in the current exhibit. The craftsmanship is superb, and the cover bears a common scene from many other large-scale wood carving furniture made in Tushanwan, stories from the Three Kingdoms. Here's an example, here's an image of a credenza from Europe. Prominently displayed in the conference room of our institute is this credenza made for the 1915 International Expo. Visitors are always impressed with the intricate carvings and elaborate presentation of diverse scenes, from the Three Kingdoms to the stories with religious background and other images in Chinese culture. Also impressive is this large wood frame presently held at the Jesuit Montreal Archives. Among the best-known churches in the world on the frame are the St. Peter's Basilica in Vatican, the Cologne Cathedral in Germany, the Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris, and most interestingly, and we can see the St. Joseph's Cathedral in Guiyang, Guizhou province in China, established in the 1870s, and it indicates the respect and the cultural sensitivity of the designers. Fast moving forward, the city of Shanghai has always been an attraction in history. While many historical buildings are still standing, it is a completely different city today. Similarly, Xujiahui, a center of the Jesuit mission enterprises in China during the first half of the 20th century, has become a major business center of the city of Shanghai. However, exploring the history of Tushanwan and the life of the orphans gave us a renewed opportunity to appreciate the cross-cultural encounter experiences in history. When we discuss art and artists, orphans are not usually the first association we will make. However, I believe that we agree that artworks created by the orphans of Tushanwan under the supervision of the Jesuit artists and the teachers throughout the years are amazing works of artistic creativity in history and in today. From the time when the first Jesuit, Father Cotteland, arrived in Shanghai in 1842 to the mid-1950s, the last Jesuit left Shanghai, there were 1,121 Jesuits served in the entire Jiangnan region. Meanwhile, some of the orphans educated and trained by the Jesuit missionaries became nationally and internationally renowned artists. But having said that, and who created this credenza? And who created this chest? And who created this frame? And who created those wonderful pagodas on display and the figurines in our museum exhibit today? Could this young man be one of them? Could this young man be one of them? And how about this young man? And how about those young men? It is impossible, I think, to answer those questions. While these orphans may remain anonymous, their artworks continue to interest us, and their life journey together with the work of the Jesuit missionaries in China are truly historical legacies of cross-cultural interactions. And their stories will continue inspiring us for many years to come. To end my presentation, I'd like to share a poem in Chinese about the life in Tushanwan, published in 1921. And I understand that not everyone in the audience today understands Chinese, but just let us listen to the sound of the language. I will try to translate the last 2 sentences into English.
徐家汇里独徘徊，风景清幽远俗哀。树影参差新月上，芦笙潇洒晚风来。清闲画笔兼诗笔，浅兴临微于水微。莫恨天涯无知己，穷途多少不凡才。
Do not afraid of not having any soulmates in the world. Extraordinary talents are just at the end of the road. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Hu Xiaoxin, for this very, very touching presentation about the life in Xujiahui. I have 2 comments to make. First, I would like to thank the Ricci Institute on behalf of ACM, because the documentary Ageless China that Dr. Wu just showed us, it's also available in our exhibition, and it is the first time that it is ever publicly shown. So thank you, Father Uchella, and thank you, Dr. Wu Xiaoxian. And I have another comment, because I saw you, Dr. Wu, you showed us a frame that you said it's currently in Montreal. And I think in the Ageless China excerpt, we saw something that was displayed that, with the cathedrals, with different cathedrals. But what I noticed is that I think as a pair to that one, you have another frame with all the pagodas. So I was just find it so fascinating that at that time they were kind of pairing these pagodas with the cathedrals as a kind of a pair. And do you have any idea? Have you ever come across do you know where that pagoda frame is?
Do you want to have it?
I think it is now my task to find this for ACM. And I hope that by the time I find it, I will ask the one from Montreal. And I will also ask Boston Ricci Institute to lend us all the other furnitures or woodworks by the Tushanwan Orphanage. And Father Uchella, you told me several times that now they are kind of fixed it or somehow installed it in the Ricci Institute, and they are never going to leave Boston. But can you promise me if one day if I can actually find that pagoda frame, that Boston is going to lend this thing to us for an exhibition? Yeah, but thank you.
我们要想一想。
Okay. We will keep the conversation. We'll keep this open. But So now I would ask our audience for questions.
I was just wondering whether the education of the orphans were actually sponsored out of churches in Europe at that time, because I cannot imagine sustaining such a big orphanage in China.
Are you talking about how financially?
Financially,
okay.
Yes.
A significant amount of money came from France, and also from other charity organizations. For example, I quoted this letter by the mission superior in Jiangnan, and he wrote this letter to I wouldn't call it a regular Catholic sister organization, but it's an organization for orphans and set up by an auxiliary organization of the Catholic Church in France. And I think they have a slogan, something similar to save a penny for a Chinese orphan. And so throughout the years, they raise money and they send the money to China. And it was upon the first payment that the superior wrote the letter thanking the sisters and saying, your money will help save. So that's one of the sources. And raising funds locally is much, much harder. And however, keeping in mind, as Father Ursula suggested, that the Xu family gave a significant part of that district to the Catholic Church. So the church Catholic community was very solid. So their contribution, especially, I think that many of the, there were two kinds of services. One is the church would take in orphans, and then some Catholic families would do foster care. And so it's a combination of both. And even this kind of family foster care in the Catholic families, that kind of tradition continues too. So, something else, if I may add. And as the Tushanwan Orphanage gradually established and became sort of mature, and their work, in addition to teaching, and as Father Columbell said, it serves two functions, orphanage and workshops. So to a certain extent, the workshops, especially coming to the end of its operation, for example, at the turn of from the Republican to the People's Republic of China, and the workshop was beginning to self-sustainable. And the most difficult time was during the Second World War. And they make a lot of things, and then they sell things too. And when you look at some of their accounting books, it's quite amazing. And people really want to buy their materials. And they come and bargain too. And then the priests became pretty good merchants. And they said, okay, I'll give you this discount. I don't believe you will get anything this quality at this price, quote. So that's interesting too.
My question is that the combination of orphanage and workshop, is it only unique to Tushanwan during Republican China, or this type of system is also being used in other regions of orphanage by Jesuits in Republican China itself? Thank you.
I think it shouldn't be the only model, so to speak, but it is the largest and most comprehensive, and I would say most successful one. And there are both Catholic and Protestant orphanages throughout the country, but I don't think that, for example, the Ricci Institute has another particular archival collection called the Passionist collection, and American Passionist Order sent 80 missionaries to Hunan province. They also set up orphanages, but I think that was only for teaching and, well, kind of caring. And then after they grow up, they were sent to the church-operated schools, not so much so of working. But the philosophy, so to speak, in the Tushanwan Orphanage is unique in the sense that we're going to teach you how to fish instead of simply giving you a piece of fish, so to speak. Yeah.
Hi, good evening. Thank you for the presentation. I'm thinking about the relationship between orphanages and conversion. Mm-hmm. So I'm wondering how many of these orphans were actually baptized. Are there baptismal records? Were they expected to convert? How many of them identified as Christian along the way, identified as Catholic along the way? And do we know what was the success rate of these conversions?
Wonderful question. And baptism is a very important part of the mission. And when it comes to children, and when I look at the records of these orphanages, there are several kinds. One is there's a significant number of children who are sent to the orphanage or left at the hospital or clinic or whatever it is, or at the door of the church. They were in a very bad shape, and a significant number of them simply died, a few days later. And I mean, it's quite hard. And there's a record at this Shengmu Yuan, and they were taking girls, basically, girls and boys under the age of 7. After 7, they moved to Tushanwan. And there is one particular room with 4 little beds. And though this room is for those who are dying, they just couldn't, save them. Most of those children would be baptized before they pass away. Now, then, of course, a significant number of orphans would be baptized, and there's a number, and on that particular chart, significant number. I would say probably 80 to 90% of the orphans would be baptized, and the 2 Chinese artists, both of them baptized at Tushanwan, and of course they had to go through. As a Christian, there's a particular daily routine you have to go through. At the beginning, they didn't understand, why we're doing this and how it was doing that. But gradually, it became part of their life too. So that's interesting. And how many of them remained to be a devout Christian? I don't think there's a record. But there are books about the Shanghai diocese, and it is out of the 126 Catholic dioceses in China before 1949, Shanghai, I think, was the most solid, largest, the most solid diocese, and it was the. I think that if I could say so, it was the most difficult diocese for the new regime to deal with. And then in the mid-1950s, the government hand came down onto them very hard. And that's, even today, in the Shanghai diocese is quite strong. So that tells us something too, in that sense.
Speaking of the new regime, right, just 2 questions. What was life in the orphanage like during the Second World War? And second, what happened to the orphanage or the orphans after 1955?
Okay. And then the first question, what happened? During the Second World War. During the Second World War, and the Japanese restricted the money transfer and for the orphanage, because they have to self-support, they have to sell, and then it was very difficult for them to get any loan or credit, so to speak, and because a lot of times that you have to make them and sell them and then get money, and then to do all of that you had to get a credit, and so it was very difficult. So many of the orphans were sent to different parishes so that they could perform some services. And there are a few of them remained. But for example, the Mr. Xu Baoqing, and he said that life was difficult, and we, every day we only have the porridge, the zhou, and hardly would we see any meat, but we survived. So that was, his kind of an interview, oral account. That's just one example. And after 1945, and rather quickly, Tushanwan came back to life. And now the orphanage was shut down in 1960. And but from the mid 19th century to the time that the orphanage was shut down, I think it has taken about 10,000 orphans, a significant number. And of course, when it was shut down, there are all kinds of reasons, quote unquote, reasons why there's no orphans and there's no need, they have grown up and they can, self-support themselves and so on and so forth. And of course, then take over different departments, turn them into a few government-owned factories or studios or schools. That's another.
Let's take one more question. Quick question.
Hi, thanks so much. I was wondering, so during this whole period, you just mentioned that the total number of orphans they have taken maybe at 10,000, right? Mm-hmm. And during this whole period, as this is a Jesuit mission itself, right? What will it be like if an orphan, perhaps during this time, feels a calling to a Catholic vocation, right, of priesthood? Was there some sort of framework for the Jesuits to enable orphans who perhaps felt like, they were baptized, they benefited from this Jesuit mission, and they wanted to be Jesuits themselves, they wanted to be ordained as priests? Do we know anything about any priests or religious who came out of this orphanage framework during this time?
That's a very good question, and I don't know. And but there was a significant number of Chinese Jesuits and scholastics before 1949. And I believe many of them actually came from Catholic families, not only from Shanghai, but from other regions. And there's a book called Sway with a Bamboo, and talking about one of the Jesuits, young Jesuits. Actually, he was in the film. Kevin, do we show that entire Ageless China or just a segment of it?
We show 10 minutes.
10 minutes.
The parts,
okay.
About the Tushanwan Orphanage.
And in that entire film, there are scenes for some young Chinese Jesuits and in training. And some of them were arrested. I don't think, otherwise I would notice that there were many or significant number of orphans who became priests later on. And otherwise I would notice that. But because there is a seminary and just next to Tushanwan, and most of the Chinese Jesuits being trained there are from not only Shanghai itself, but from neighboring dioceses. It's one of the biggest seminaries in China, so that was a kind of a training center, really quite a bit. And some of the young Chinese priests, when they were, I believe, in 1949, and about the time when the communists took over, and the Chinese priests were divided into two groups, and many of them were sent to the Philippines for further training. Some of them stayed, and for those stayed, they really suffered a lot. And there's one young Chinese priest at that time, Father Zhang, and he died. He died of hunger strike, and after he was being arrested. So it's and also interesting. I've only seen in my archival research, and I think I've only seen one picture of him, and there are quite a number of them, and like that. It's another interesting aspect, a story that needs to be told. So, thank you.
So, thank you, Dr. Hu, and thank you again, Father Ucheda. Thank you for two amazing talks. Thank you for this wonderful evening. And yeah, yeah, please, if you have any feedback, just scan the QR code and let us know. And also, our next talk would be on the 27th of June with a talk by our one of the collaborators in our exhibition, the photographer Darren So. So thank you again. Thank you very, very much. Thank you, Father Uchella, and thank you, Dr. Wu Xiaojian. Thank you very much. Thank you.